Hello and welcome to The View from the Clipper, the pilot episode of The View from the Clipper. I am Josh Sexton, credentialed member of the Clippers media. I've been lucky enough to cover a couple of games down the years, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by James Warner, who is the host of the Clippers UK page. A bit of a sort of brainchild of me and James as a combination. As James had mentioned to me a couple of months back now that he'd been looking to getting into podcasting. I've worked in podcasting for a couple of years now. I've been doing some live streams and things for Bleacher Report over the past couple of months as well. So me and James decided that going into this season, we wanted to make sure, because it's an interesting time to be a Clippers fan. So we wanted to make sure that we were covering it from the UK angle, because we're starting to see the Clippers go a little bit global. We're starting to see them get a few more fans over here in the UK. And James has done brilliant things building a community of Clippers fans we've all been connecting with each other over the last few years now. So it's good to finally jump on here with James and discuss the Clippers. But first and foremost, James, how are you doing?
Yeah, all good, mate. No, completely agree with everything you just said. I've been obviously looking to kick off a podcast for quite some time. Obviously, I've been running Clippers UK since 2019. I've seen the opening of the 213 era, and obviously this week seeing the close. So, yeah, really excited to get this started with you. And obviously, it's been a crazy week for Clippers, and yeah, really excited just to chop it up and talk through some of the big points from this week.
Of course, man, of course, and there's a lot to sink our teeth into. But we'll start with the the biggest talking point, as you say there, James, because it signaled the end of the 213 era this week. And listen, it's been a slow and I guess painful breakup in some senses for us as Clippers fans, because there's been noise for a couple of weeks that it felt like it was heading towards this way. There's been sort of unsatisfactory things I'd say coming out from Paul himself in terms of the way he talks about the organization. There's been even more sort of unsavory. I'd go as far as saying things said by his co-hosts about teammates and the organization and things in the past few weeks. So I'd been optimistic up until a point, and then it sort of got to a point where it felt like almost like a parting of ways was the the best thing for all parties, and finally we get it coming through, that Paul is getting his 4-year max from Philadelphia. He's moving on to there. What was your sort of immediate reaction when you realized that it was confirmed that he was moving to Philadelphia, James?
I think I think over the last few weeks, the closer we got to the deadline, it started to feel more and more inevitable that he
Yeah.
was going to leave. And I don't think it really sunk in the build up. And it only really sunk in when it was clear that he wasn't going to come back. And obviously, Clippers released a statement just before he agreed to sign in Philadelphia. I was more in the camp of wanting to keep Paul George this summer. I thought the alternative for the team keeping Kawhi and obviously looking to keep James made more sense to keep him around if we could agree to keep him in that 3-year contract that they were so desperate to keep him in. But I think for 4 years, it wasn't worth the Clippers going into that. And obviously we can dive into the details over why ultimately they decided to part ways. But yeah, I mean, I'm sad to see him go, but I do completely agree with the sentiment that he's obviously not lived up to the expectation. I think he's used the podcast that he's on to suggest that he will be around for a long time, and obviously he's mentioned that he wanted to retire as a Clipper, but yeah, obviously hasn't come off in the end. I think a lot of Clipper fans do feel let down by him, but yeah, ultimately the 4-year, 212 million that he's signed for in Philadelphia is, I think, just outrageous. It's a lot of money for someone of his age, and I think Clippers looking to protect what they've built so far, and I think they've still got a good thing going with Kawhi and James. Yeah, it was a tough sell, and I completely agree with them. Looking to stay in that 3-year period to stay within the apron that they are and avoid the new CBA that's caused so many issues for these big super teams to stay together.
Yeah, well, we'll start with sort of giving PG a little bit of leeway, because listen, ultimately he has every right to go for the money. You mentioned that it's huge money, it's max money, it's a 4-year contract. It sets him up with financial security until you imagine that he does finish his career in Philadelphia, and unless there's some sort of miracle which allows him to get another contract off the back of that, maybe sort of eyeing up a vet minimum beyond that point. But it's hard to see beyond the current contract that sign with Philadelphia for now. You can look back on, good times with the Clippers. We shouldn't forget the 2021 playoff run, and from the moment Kawhi went down in that, rounding off that Utah series, Paul did lead the Clippers well in that sense. He was great in that series. He came up big when Kawhi went down. But like you say, that to sort of almost flip it to the, and I don't want to say negative, because I don't think anyone should be like overwhelmingly negative about Paul's time with the Clippers. It's more that sort of idea of what you said, of like, it felt like he didn't realize his full potential, and that's because the full potential ultimately of 2-on-3. And I've seen journalists and members of the media coming out in the last few days and suggesting that the 2-on-3 era has been a failure, and it's hard to disagree with that, because this era was meant to bring the Clippers a championship. I've seen the sort of screenshot of Lou Will and Pat Bev when they found out the news in the casino, saying that the price has gone up and stuff. Like we've sort of lived through all of that. We've been through the ups and downs. We've been gone into the bubble thinking that we were favourites for a championship, and ultimately came up short there. We've seen the end of Doc Rivers' time there. We've seen countless guys who Paul has lobbied for come into the franchise, playmakers, Paul's close personal friends and things like that. The mountains have moved within Los Angeles, on this side of Los Angeles anyway, over the past few years, to make sure that these guys can get a chip under their belts, and ultimately it's not come to the fore, and that's the bit that does sort of leave somewhat of a sour taste. And listen, you can look back on the Lob City era, and there's not many guys there that left the Clippers with a sour taste, maybe besides Chris Paul, but that was more to do with his behavior on the Rockets in those early days. All those guys left with the best wishes ultimately, but just it didn't quite happen. I think the bit, like you say, James, that's been frustrating from Paul's side is just that desire to bash, and it's we should say it's not him. Like the comments about Zubac being overweight came from Jackie, one of the co-hosts on the podcast. I can't even remember the other guy's name, but I don't even feel like giving him the credit for it. I think it's like Stella or something. Coming out the other day saying that the Clippers suck in reply to fans under the revelation of George's contract, and saying that he should have been calling Kawhi Kawaii, because suggesting that Kawhi can never turn up to games and things like that. So it does feel like it's soured a little in the past few days, and maybe there is this idea of Paul George's legacy with the Clippers that will just leave a little bit of a sour taste now.
Yeah, I mean, if you think back to the day he joined and everything that the Clippers gave up for him as well, I think that's going to continue to leave a sour taste in fans' minds as well. And if you look at how good OKC are nowadays after that trade, it does leave a lot of Clipper fans thinking, you didn't manage to deliver for us, although you kept banging the drum of how you were a Clipper and you wanted to stay and you wanted to retire there. But ultimately, they just, him and Kawhi just couldn't get it lined up in the right times, with their health. I think they've only played 26 playoff games together, which is absolutely insane in 5 years. They just couldn't get healthy at the right time. One was injured, one was not, and it felt like they just weren't going to get that, or at least based off the 5 years of data we have, can you continue to push that forward? I'm not sure. So I think the 3-year contract was a sensible offer by the Clippers, and ultimately Paul George and his camp have much preferred the money, and that's up to them. And sometimes in the NBA, that's just business. It's just hard when he's coming on his podcast saying things like, I'm the number 2 guy, or I've had to play these sort of glue guy roles, but then ultimately he's been seeking a larger contract than your self-admitted number 1 option, Kawhi. Obviously opted for that 3-year deal. Obviously James, and we can go on to James, come back for that 2-year deal. So yeah, I think like I said, he's looked to take the opportunity to get more money, and business is business. I think he's had a pretty good season if we're honest. The regular season, that's probably one of his most efficient scoring seasons.
Yeah.
But I think the Clippers have noticed that slight decline. As he's getting older, he's, I think, maybe taking on less responsibility on the defensive end. There's certainly been a decline in his passing ability. I know that he's had like a lot on his shoulders over the last few years, which is obviously why he's campaigned for certain players like John Wall, Reggie, who we had, Russell Westbrook to come through and take some of that load off him. But that playmaking side, I think, has definitely declined. We've seen sort of random turnovers in playoff games, which have cost us opportunities. The rebounding side, so the dirty work that he has been alluding to, you can tell that he's not a fan of that. And on the podcast, I think a few weeks ago, he mentioned that the opportunity that he would take, it would have to be the right style of play. So you think perhaps something has gone awry there, not just in terms of the offer that the Clippers have given him, but maybe he's not seeing Clippers or how Clippers are currently built as the best way to maximize his last few years of his career. And I think that's fair enough. And I know there was someone in the media the other day saying that he's not a catch and shoot guy. He's absolutely a catch and shoot guy, and he did a terrific job in that role this season. But if you look at the Clippers going forward now with James Harden as that number 2, you could argue he had better postseason. At least he had one. Well, he played, I think, one of the most efficient playoff rounds out of all of them. Obviously, albeit just one round. I think Paul himself was like 19 points, 6 rebounds, 4 assists. So as a first option when Kawhi was out, he didn't really live up to that as well. So I think maybe it was the right time to part ways. And I was thinking that during the Dallas series, that how much further can we take this? Obviously, we only just seen the start of this sort of 3-man team, this sort of superstar team. But obviously now it's been made very hard to keep together as part of the new CBA. So I think it's probably best that they have parted ways, and obviously we'll see from some of the roster building how they managed to piece it back together for next season.
Yeah, we don't like to do too much of the pocket watching, because we'll save that for the uneducated guys like the Stephen A saying that PG is not a catch and shoot player, when I think he had one of his best scoring years on catch and shoot this season. He was definitely his most efficient year as a Clipper from 3-point land. So we don't want to do too much of that. But ultimately, you mentioned there is sort of his own shift in roles and responsibilities down the years, and a lot of that has come from his mindset, and the reason that you can chart that specifically is because Paul has spoke so much in the last few years about this. I remember you could go back to as early as his appearance on the All the Smoke podcast with Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson, and I believe that was the summer after Doc got fired, so the summer after the bubble, and he talked about how Doc was basically running him like JJ Redick and had him coming off pin downs and screens and chasing around to try and hunt open 3-point shots. And he talks about wanting to have the ball in his hands more. Ty Lue gave him the ball in his hands more. He made him the lead playmaker on the Clippers, and wanted him to tap into what Ty saw as an underrated playmaking ability. He's since come out and criticized that, because he said that the load is too great on him, and that it doesn't allow him to defend as well and do some of the dirty work as well. And then even then, the defending and the dirty work, he's come out and publicly said he doesn't think it should be him who has to defend the teams, the opposition team's best player. He's talked about sort of shying away from some of those responsibilities of having to do the dirty work. He talked about guys like Nicolas Batum, Robert Covington, and the loss of them. And by the way, the Robert Covington argument from within that, for a guy who really didn't play very many games for the Clippers ultimately at the end, even though we all saw the potential. It feels like a straw man argument ultimately, because you're talking about guys who yes, they could do the dirty work, and that was what we liked about them all, but that's what max contract should hold. We've just watched a playoff series, a final series I should say, where Jaylen Brown has actively hunted the matchup with Luka Doncic in basically every scenario he can. He's wanted to be the point of attack defender for the Celtics throughout that, and that is a guy who's on max money. Jason Tatum's just signed his new contract for max money, and basically spent the entire final series being a facilitator while taking criticism. I think he shouldn't have been getting criticized as much as he did. I think it's a bit unwarranted, because he was efficient and he was still scoring at a high clip throughout that series. So it does sort of feel like Paul coming out and demanding the money that he has, demanding the years on the contract that he has. And listen, it's come out in the past few days that he said he felt a little bit, or at least it's been sort of briefed through the media that he felt let down by Kawhi taking the smaller offer. Kawhi was clearly thinking about the team and the future of the franchise effectively. When you look at the new CBA and stuff, it would have made the Clippers be able to go into the next phase easier if Paul would have took a more team friendly deal in the way that James and Kawhi both have. But ultimately, Paul didn't want to settle for that. And as I say, we're not going to do too much of the pocket watching and talk about what people deserve and what they don't deserve. But for me, if you're a guy who is basically running from the roles and responsibilities that it takes to be a max player, then I'm not too mad at the Clippers for deciding to part ways either. And we'll come on to talk about some of the moves that they've made in the aftermath of that. But it's the Clippers do really have to think about the CBA and what comes next. And one of the things that we've been pleased about with the ownership of Steve Ballmer in recent months and years is that he's a free spending owner. He's a very ambitious owner. The Clippers will never have to really go into a full scale rebuild with the guy who's just become the 6th richest man in the world, overtaking his old business partner Bill Gates. So that sort of helps in that sense that you have Steve Ballmer there. But the punishments for going over that second apron, for being a second apron team, are going to hamstring teams, I imagine, like the 76ers coming up in the next few years. So I guess in a sense, James, it is important that the Clippers got under that for the future of the franchise. And again, as much as I don't begrudge Paul George for getting off, for going and getting his max money, I also don't begrudge the Clippers for getting off of Paul George's money ultimately.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as a part of me that is curious, surely he's been briefed about this new CBA and the potential penalties for the Clippers going forward. And I don't know if he came out and actively sort of asked for James Harden to come onto the team, but I'm sure he was pretty happy when we acquired him. But he must have known the implications with the new CBA that acquiring a third star like James Harden would mean for the Clippers' flexibility moving forward. I mean, I think just one of the penalties that come with this new CBA, if you're within that second apron, if you're in it for 2 out of 4 years, one of your first round picks will automatically turn into a 30th pick. So that's just one example of how it could really affect the Clippers in the long run. And you have to also consider the age of the stars as well. So you've got Paul George, Kawhi, and James. Then once Paul George finishes that 76ers contract, he's going to be 38 years old. And you can see the decline that he's already going through, given the last few years he's been on the team. So yeah, I'm quite surprised that he came out, well, as sort of alluded to the fact that he wasn't impressed with the Clippers offer. But I think maybe it's just because he's had talk elsewhere that he could get that max contract. And I guess when you're in that position, that extra $70 million or so is a lot. And I obviously would, from a basketball perspective, would say, you've already got a lot of money, why not try and help the team? You want it to win a championship. You bang that drum and you want to win one for the Clippers. You want to win their first title. Why not, take the same ambition that Kawhi has had by taking less money and then trying to help the team? But yeah, I think that's just ultimately NBA business. And yeah, you can just see how the Clippers have reacted. They've tried to play chicken with Paul, and we've got all the factors on our side. It's obviously his hometown. I know he spoke about in the past. I think his mum had a stroke when he was young, and she sort of finds it difficult to travel to games. So I think the Clippers thought that they could probably get away with that 3-year offer if Kawhi did accept as the coined leader of the team, that Paul might follow suit. But yeah, it just hasn't happened. And I guess the Clippers have to move on, and they've moved quite quickly this week. So yeah, we bid farewell to 2-1-3, and now it's Kawhi and Harden, the 1-2 punch that will take the Clippers into Intuit Dome in 2024-25.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll round off on the Paul George discussion for now and move on to talk about James Harden re-signing, I should say, with the team. I always have to be careful with that, especially with the English accent. I think of resigning, re-signing. But I just want to round off by saying, Paul George ultimately was for me personally, one of my favorite non-Clippers before he became a Clippers player. I was so pleased that we'd gone and got a hometown guy. I remember I'd been to Wireless Festival. I was at, it was the nights in between going to Wireless Festival that I woke up to the news of Kawhi and Paul George becoming Clippers players. And at that time, people can talk retrospectively about what they want about the trade with the Oklahoma City Thunder. I had no doubt in my mind it was the right thing for the Clippers to do to make that big swing. There's been times where it's been a pleasure to watch Paul George as one of my sort of favorite all-time NBA players. His jersey still hangs in my apartment for now. I'm looking to maybe replace it with a Nicolas Batum jersey or something along those lines. We'll come on to some more of the Clippers acquisitions, of course, but Paul does go with the best wishes of I think most people with the Clippers, and maybe some hate watchers and things like that in the future. But most of us don't like the 76ers too tough, so it won't be necessarily anything personal towards Paul. He goes away, as one of the Clippers. I believe he's a Clippers leader in 3 points. So he's set records with the Clippers. Didn't get over the hump in terms of winning a championship, but we'll see what this season brings in terms of potential contention and what the next few years brings. And one of the things we do know, James, is that your namesake, James Harden, re-signing with the team this summer, and the money probably ended up being a little bit more than we probably expected it to be. I'm not mad at it because the number of years is also not what I expected it to be. I thought they would have him on the same on the same number of years as Kawhi with 3, but it's a 1-on-1 $70 million deal for 2 years with a player option in the second year. And ultimately, you mentioned it before when we were talking about PG, that James, for me, proved this season that he came in with a lot of doubt. There's the rant from the Mavs, one of the guys on the Mavs announcing team that James is the problem child and things like that coming into the Clippers franchise. For me, he proved this season. You look at the run the Clippers went on from December onwards. You look at their run against Dallas in the playoffs, if you can call it much of a run, and James was the person who stood up and made himself accountable in those times. And I'm not mad with the idea of him coming into this season being the second option. And listen, we may see another big swing trade. It seems like, sort of in the tea leaves from what guys in the Clippers media space are saying, that there will be, one more swing from the Clippers before the next few sort of days and weeks of figuring themselves out with free agency. But, if we do go into the season with James as a second option, I wouldn't be completely, overly fussed about it, because for me, he's proven that he is capable of being that and worthy of being that.
Yeah, I mean, when we first acquired him, I wasn't completely on board. I didn't think we needed a third star, and obviously the reputation he brings with him sort of brought those.
The Clippers UK group chat was a light, it's fair to say. I think it's probably the most active we've all been.
Honestly, it was absolutely crazy. I think it was one that obviously dragged through the summer, dragged into the season. I think the team got off to a good start, considering everything that was going on as well. And then we had that sort of few game stretch where sort of James Harden, Russell Westbrook playing together, and it did feel like the Clippers may have had the wrong made the wrong move. But ultimately, they stuck with it. They figured it out. They moved Russell Westbrook to the bench, and they went on that sort of crazy run through the middle of the season. And I think James really proved that he could be a good second option. And obviously in the playoffs as well, I thought he was one of our best players, at least out of the two, Paul George and James. I thought he had the best contribution to the team. There was at least a moment in time in the playoffs where I thought he was having the best performance in the whole of the NBA. And that was maybe like a 3-4 game stretch before I think he had a particularly bad game 5. But yeah, I thought he was awesome in the playoffs in particular, and he was just so efficient, so reliable. All the big moments that you'd want from James Harden, he was delivering. Ultimately, we just didn't have Kawhi Leonard to push it over the line against Dallas. But yeah, I think he did rank as like the 5th best box plus minus player in the playoffs. And yeah, he was just really good. Fit really well, nicely between Kawhi and Paul George. And now we get to see Clippers really buy into the system, right? And we came up with that quite earlier in the season, said that I am the system. And I think the Clippers will need that, and they'll need to lean into more of his offensive game. He was really good at being, I guess, the orchestrator of the offense. I think now they're going to need to lean into him being more of that offensive player now that we've lost that offensive load from PG. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think that 2-year deal is interesting. I thought maybe he would line up with Kawhi with the 3 years, but that 1+1 deal could suggest that he might, decline that player option and seek more money. So not only are we getting sort of a James Harden off a good season for the Clippers, but we have one who might be seeking a bigger deal in that second year. So he's got something to prove. Obviously, he's had Paul George leave, and I don't think Paul George outrightly said that he wasn't impressed with James, but he sort of indicated that him coming may have meant that in other areas, Batum, Covington, we lacked some physicality. So he's got some doubters to address in this upcoming season for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's nothing that he didn't have to deal with last season. As we said before, he came to the Clippers with plenty of doubters. So he's going to go into another season where there is doubt around him. But one of the things I'm not sort of doubtful about, and you've referenced it there, James, as well, that, him being the system, one of the things I think was probably stood out most to me from this season. I think it's something the Clippers do need to lean into more going into next season as well, is that relationship with Ivica Zubac on the court. I know there's been a couple of people in the Clippers media space, Jamal Christopher being a big one of them, who's said, we need to lean more into Zubac. I think Justin, LA Clippers Film, tweeted the other day as well that, we'd be a much better team if we even lent 15% more. I think it was something along the lines that he said into Zubac and did more with his scoring. And ultimately, I think James Harden's relationship with Zubac allows you to do that the way those two play together in the pick and roll. There were stories coming out from earlier last season that James and Zubac would be staying till the end of practice with each other, or beyond the end of practice with each other, to sort of practice that. And that was a thing that James had, earmarked, was that he wanted to improve that with Zubac, because of course he's had good relationships with centers like Clint Capella and Marcin Gortat and people like that in the past. So, James has that experience of being able to do that and playing well in a sort of two-man game with a big man. And that's one of the things I would like to see much more of going into this season. Of course, he's going to need to bring more of that scoring punch that he showed in the playoffs, which he maybe didn't show quite as much during the regular season, almost because it didn't, the situation didn't necessitate it. As you mentioned before, Paul was effectively playing at an all NBA level before he went down with his injury. Kawhi was all NBA before he went down with his injury as well, towards the very back end of the season. So you'd imagine that James have to take a slight step up in terms of production, but it is those sort of playmaking chops. It's his ability to bring other Clippers into play that I think is going to be once again just absolutely crucial for the team this season.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that Zubac shout, because obviously in that Dallas series, at the start of every game, they were going to him in the post, and I think they can definitely use him more. And now that Paul is off the team, could he be the third option on offense? Because I think they are definitely underusing him. He's so efficient around the rim, and yeah, I think it's slightly disappointing, obviously, that Paul's leaving, because they finally got the playmaker that they were looking for, and then they only really spent part of the season together in one playoff round to see it through. And so they went through a number of different point guards to finally land on James. But I think he's absolutely the best playmaker the team has had, and you can see that the way he works with Zoo in the pick and roll. I'm interested with a few of the new guys that they've acquired and how he can get them going as well. But yeah, I think we could really see a step up in Zoo's game. Obviously, he's extension eligible, I think, next week, or this week or next week. So he'll be obviously hopefully on a bigger contract, and we're looking to prove himself next season. And I think they can definitely lean into more. And James is a great way to unlock more of that offensive talent that Zoo obviously has and has showcased. And I think he's actually showcasing right now. He's actually playing Luka Doncic in the Olympics qualifier, and he's been unbelievable against him so far. So yeah, I think overall, great to see James back. I think we all expected it. Interested to see how this new Clipper team looks without Paul on the team. But yeah, absolutely excited to see James take on more responsibility alongside Kawhi this season.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the 1-2 punch heading into Intuit Dome being the beard and the claw, which I think I'm sure there'll be some sort of nicknames and things that can write themselves from there too. But we'll move on to some of the new acquisitions, and the headline one, I guess, James, is the signing of Derrick Jones Jr. And it feels, fitting in a way, and Paul is going to be one of the themes that runs throughout this podcast, because that's just the way it's got to be. Of course, it's the biggest movement in the free agency market that we've seen so far. It's one of the biggest moves in recent years for the Clippers, besides maybe bringing James Harden in last season. But to go out in a summer in which you lose Paul George and sign the guy who basically was the Paul George killer in the playoffs in Derrick Jones Jr. Listen, this is a move that I'm in love with. I think you could only improve on this move for me if Derrick Jones Jr. was a de facto power forward I think he can play some four. I think he'd be, slightly undersized at the four position. I imagine we'll see more of him at the three and Kawhi sliding to the four again, but maybe Derrick picking up some of Kawhi's slack on the defensive end, defending some of those bigger guys. But we ultimately, one of the things we wanted, whether Paul George returned or not, in this offseason was for the Clippers to get younger and more athletic. And Derrick Jones Jr. isn't the youngest guy in the NBA by any stretch of the imagination. I think he's coming up to sort of around 27, 28 years old now. But in terms of athleticism, there's few guys who are more athletic in the NBA. You've seen that the way that Derrick Jones Jr. can, jump out the gym, the way he is around the rim, as a lob threat even. And that's one of the things I expect the Clippers to lean into more this season as well, with James Harden's playmaking, and as I say, leaning more into Zoo. I expect there to be some sort of semblance of a Lob City returning to the Clippers, which would be very exciting to see in the new arena. But yeah, I don't know about you, James. That I was really, really over the moon when I saw the Clippers had made this move.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure in the build up to us signing Derrick Jones, you actually dropped a message in our group chat to say that you wanted to sign him. So yeah, I was pretty surprised to see his name pop up with the Clippers, but they moved so quickly after that Paul George move. Obviously acquired him on a 3-year, $30 million contract, which I think is absolutely deserved. And in that Dallas series, he really stood out as one of their key defenders, and I think their defense was awesome the whole way through the playoffs. Being that point of attack defender against Paul George in particular, as you're saying, it's so ironic that he's not the one to replace him, but he's sort of been brought in to sort of pick up some of that load. And I think that's what the Clippers are trying to address with some of these moves, is like, as we losing Paul George, obviously arguably one of the best two-way players, maybe not sort of as of right now, but you've got to think what you're losing with him on the defensive side. They're starting to pick up some of that slack. And I think in particular really interesting just because I felt the Clippers weren't a great defensive team last year. At least I think they ranked 16th for defensive rating and around 22nd after the All-Star break. I think that definitely stepped up in the playoffs as we all expected. But I think adding someone like Derrick Jones to this Clippers team is going to be really exciting. He plays with so much intensity. As you said, a lot of athleticism. Is a lot younger than the guys, and I think these are all attributes that the Clippers have spoke about over the past year since the new CBA has come in. They've looked to get younger. You've seen that with the draft picks, but yeah, I think it's a really good value contract. It's quite similar to Terrence Mann, and I think that's very, very interesting. Obviously, I think Terrence. I think they are quite similar in terms of the way they're both spot shooters, both look to be point of attack defenders. There's a decision on Terrence, and I think I was listening to Lord Mario earlier, and he was suggesting that Terrence might actually look to play out the season rather than extending just to see how much value he can get. So maybe the team suspects that Terrence might look to go into free agency, similar to how Paul George has done this year, to really get that bigger contract that I think he has deserved. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how he fits alongside James, Kawhi, whether he plays 3 or 4, like you said, or even comes off the bench. We'll have to see. But yeah, it was really awesome the way he was playing Paul George, and to now have him on our team is really good. And he held Paul George to 10 field goals in 40 minutes of matchup across the first round, along with 2 blocks. I think one of those was a three-point block, and 2 turnovers as well. So yeah, he really put him through hell in that Dallas series, and I hated us playing against him. And I think that's when someone will be a really good fit for you, is when you hate playing against someone. And yeah, I think he's going to be a fan favorite next year, particularly with Intuit Dome and how they're trying to lean into that more I guess basketball atmosphere, like student basketball atmosphere that Steve has been talking about, and have the crowd really on top of the court. I feel like having a good defense will really light up that crowd, and I think that's maybe what they're going for. Obviously, I've spoke about how they weren't a great defensive team this year. They brought in Jeff Van Gundy as well, who's been known for being a good defensive coach. So if they can really put together a good defensive team, albeit maybe not as good offensive as last year, they still have James Harden. If they can put some of these guys around him and sort of cause hell for oppositions by having those really good point of attack defenders. Terrence Mann, Derrick Jones is another we'll get onto. But yeah, I think they can really sort of look back at previous iterations of the Clippers. I'm thinking sort of 2021 even back to like the Lou Will era of being more of the underdog team, playing with more intensity. And I think that's something that maybe the 2-1-3 era has lacked a bit. And I think that's the only time we really saw that was in 2021, where we made that Western Conference Finals run. And we saw the importance of having really good role players. I don't think anyone expected Derrick Jones and the Dallas Mavericks to go to the NBA Finals this year, but they absolutely turned it on, and he was a big part of their defense in that run to the finals. So really, really excited to see Derrick into it later this year.
Yeah, I think the defensive points are a particularly good one, because I think you've seen from probably the teams who aren't necessarily, dynastic teams, if you want to call them that, in recent seasons, that defense ultimately given the foundation for stars to go and succeed. The Boston Celtics are probably the best defensive team in the NBA for me. I don't know if the stats sort of reflected that from last season, but I know they'll be definitely up there in terms of net rating, because they're a team who can score a heavy amount of points in a night because of the way they shoot the ball as well. But historically, the Celtics in recent seasons have been a really good defensive team. You look back to the Raptors team that won when Kawhi Leonard was there in 2019. They were a really good defensive team, and that provided the foundation for guys like Kyle Lowry and Kawhi to go out and be the killers on that team ultimately. And I think that's if the Clippers are going to be, listen, whether they're contenders this season, whether they're just a competitive, whether they're trying to be a winning team this season, I think the defense is going to provide the platform for so much of that, and that's where I think Derrick Jones Jr. Will come up clutch. And then you mentioned the money as well. If we're talking about the CBA, and not to get too sort of bogged down in all the details of that, but just purely from a point of view of the Clippers being able to win going forward, having a guy like Derrick Jones Jr. going into his 30th year on just 10 million a year effectively. I think it's really, really good value for the Clippers, and it's not even the full taxpayer mid-level exception. The Clippers have left themselves with a little bit of change in the taxpayers mid-level exception to go and potentially make some more pickups in the next few days. And I think we were probably all slightly surprised by what they did with the biannual exception, James, to sort of move on to that if you're ready to, because again, it was another message that I'd put in the group about a guy I wanted to bring back, because I'd seen that he'd been released by the Philadelphia 76ers. I'd seen that they weren't going to extend him going into this season. I'll be honest, it didn't cross my mind about like the fit or anything like that. It more just felt like an emotional one for me. But there's no questions for me about the fit with Nicolas Batum coming back to the Clippers. But the overwhelming thing for me is Nicolas Batum wanted to retire as a Clipper. The Clippers didn't even really want to trade him away. The Sixers were insistent that they wanted the PJ Tucker money going back the Clippers' way, and that was the only way to sort of even those books. So it makes some sense in the end. But I'm so pleased for Nicolas Batum for all that he did for the Clippers, for the way this fan base embraced him down the years, that he is going to get the opportunity now to retire as a Clipper. And we'll talk about the fit and stuff like that, but just the emotional aspect of that is overwhelming in some ways, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that was the most difficult part of that Harden trade, was seeing Nicolas Batum go, who has come out and said how much he owes to the Clippers organization, particularly Ty Lue, and credits him for saving his career. It was a really tough one, because he has been a fan favorite through the 2-1-3 era. Obviously, his family loved living in LA, and that was a really difficult split. And having to take back PJ Tucker was obviously really, really difficult on our part. And I don't think anyone expected it to come back, even given the cap space we've been provided with Paul George leaving. It was an absolute surprise, and I was pretty certain he was going to go to the San Antonio Spurs to link up with fellow Frenchman Victor Wembanyama. But obviously LA is a big factor in that. He still owes a lot to the Clippers organization, and it's great to see him back. And of course, talking about the fit, he was a big miss for us last year, as we had some big issues with the forward position. As we've seen over the few years he's been with us, he can guard absolutely every position. Fantastic playmaker. Again, another fantastic spot-up shooter to put next to Kawhi and James. And I think James and Batum in particular, you can just see that ball getting swung out to the corner, and Nick Batum coming in with those clutch threes that he's just constantly does. Even with the Sixers last year, how many games that he managed to swing for them. He instantly became a fan favorite in Philadelphia over just a short time he played there. So really, really excited that Nick Batum is back. And I think another underrated element that he provides is sort of veteran leadership. Obviously, he knows the Clippers organization, but not only that, he is a leader. He's a leader in the French team, and he's been he's been able to provide that veteran presence throughout his career. And I think that's something we potentially missed. And I know there's been talk about the locker room of last season not being maybe where it should be, and maybe through some of those guys we lost some of that leadership. He can instantly bring that back, and will be a great role model for the young guys coming through, like Kobe Brown, for example. So yeah, really, really excited that Nick Batum back, and obviously the 2-year 9.6 million is an excellent deal as well. I think he's probably one of the few guys in the league at his age that I would pay that money for. I think he's probably one of the best veterans that you can get. And I think it's also pretty interesting the fact that these guys are willing to come back late in their career. Obviously, Nick Batum still chasing that championship. He believes in where the Clippers are, and doesn't maybe have the same sentiment that others do in the league, that we might not be as good next season, and still believes in Kawhi and the organization. So it's really exciting to have Nick Batum back. It's probably one of the best moves that we've made this week. Yeah, I'm interested in your thoughts as well on the fit.
Yeah, you know what, you referenced the 3-point shooting in particular before, and we've seen, again, to reference the Boston Celtics during this run to the finals, one of the sort of key assets for them has been, when they've gone through scoring slumps in games, you've seen guys like Sam Hauser being able to shoot the lights out from the corners, and Sam Hauser is another one of the players in the league who's perfected that no dip 3-point shot, and that's become a specialty of Nick Batum's down the years. You saw him, honing on that in his. I think there was a 30-point game for Philly this season, wasn't there, where it felt like every single one of those shots was a no dip three, and Philly fans were going absolutely crazy for that. So I love the fit with Nick Batum back on the team. He's, the irony of him being such a passionate Frenchman is that he's almost a Swiss Army knife of a basketball player, because he brings a bit of everything. He brings, a real high level of defense. He brings offense in terms of the spot up shooting, as we've said. He brings playmaking chops as well, sort of relative for his position. He brings rebound, and he's got length and things like that. So I've absolutely no doubts that Nicolas Batum can still be, a big contributor off the bench on this team. And I'm really excited by the signing. I'd sort of said it to one of my friends last night, because he's a Golden State Warriors fan, and the Golden State Warriors have not been doing quite as well so far through free agency. But I was like, it seems like the Clippers are just on a tour to sign the guys that I wanted us to sign, and the guys that I sort of love coming back as well. And obviously, that Paul was something of a blow to that, but an expected blow in the end. James re-signing is great news, because I wanted to see him back. Derrick Jones Jr. was a guy I've wanted to see on the team, particularly off the back of as we said before, the run with the Mavericks. But Nicolas Batum was the one that has sort of captured my heart, because as you say, the way that his family embraced LA and their time here, the way that Nico himself has spoken about the way that the Clippers fans embraced him. You referenced that he talked about Ty saying he'd saved his career. He originally said saved his life, and maybe sort of scaled that back a little bit to just saving his career. But I think that's genuinely how important this move to the Clippers originally was for Nicolas Batum. I think there was so much, riding on it. He was thinking about retirement then. There was stories coming out. I think Lily Batum herself had said that this summer he was considering retirement after the Olympics and things. So for the Clippers to once again turn his head and give him that opportunity to retire in LA just feels like the perfect, almost tying the bow on this Nicolas Batum story with the Clippers.
Yeah, and but the Batum battalion managed to
Stand
reassemble after a few years. Just didn't think we'd be able to say that again. And I think, like you've alluded to, obviously, thanks Ty for rejuvenating his career. And I think maybe as he got closer to that trade from the Clippers, I think he was considering retirement as well. But I think once he found that Philadelphia were particularly interested in him and keeping him in the rotation, he decided against that, and ultimately that's to our benefit, because we get to see him come back to the Clippers, and we get to see the Batum battalion enjoy watching Nicolas Batum sink threes in the Intuit Dome next season. So yeah, really exciting.
Yeah, 100%. I'm sure that's one that the Clippers Spencer is absolutely made up with, to see his Batum battalion coming home to roost there. And we'll get on to some of the sort of, the more recent acquisitions for the Clippers. And of course, there's a few things that are still sort of shaking themselves out. One of the things that we have to acknowledge, it can't be all the sort of flowers and positivity that comes with the Nicolas Batum signing, because there was, a controversial signing within all this. And again, I mentioned that the Clippers are on a tour to sign all the lads that I liked or that I wanted to see come into the Clippers organization. There was one that categorically I didn't like. I don't like the context that surrounds it. I don't like what the Clippers are trying to do by making these kind of moves in the market, and that was the acquisition of Kevin Porter Jr. And I almost don't even want to consider too much. And you kind of, if you want, James, I'm not going to stop you by any stretch of imagination, but I don't want to consider really the money or the fit or the value in this, because I just think this is another poor move to try and sort of cut corners on rehabbing a guy on the Clippers books. They'd made this move with Josh Primo, and the experiment ended, in quite an abrupt way in April when they decided to bring in Kai Jones instead. I don't, by the way, like that people are lumping Kai Jones in with these two guys. I think a guy going through mental health issues and struggling with an adaptation into the league is different to a guy who had settled on him being settled, reached settlement, I should say, on him being an alleged sexual predator to all intents and purposes, and a guy who has reached settlement through a guilty plea on domestic violence. It's not what I want to see. The moves that the Clippers are making, as I say, after the Josh Primo experiment failed, I'd have hoped that they wouldn't have made another one of these moves, but unfortunately they have, and it's definitely one of the ones, James, that does leave a sour taste in your mouth in this offseason, because the Clippers have made so many good moves since as well. There's so many of those guys out there we talked about, and some of the guys we're going to come on to talk about as well, who fit really well, who the money is, it looks really nice for. The Clippers have been building in a really positive way, and this is just one that, from the point of view of women who are working within the Clippers organization, from the point of view of domestic violence victims who are fans of the Clippers, it's just one that I can never ever get on board with.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's not one that I want to analyze too much, although I think in the past I've been a fan of his. I think as soon as the news came out about what ultimately happened with his girlfriend, I just didn't ever consider that he'd be back in the NBA, let alone on the Clippers. And I think if you consider the Josh Primo case, I think maybe that was the one chance they had to try and rejuvenate a player. But obviously going again a second time with Kevin Porter Jr., I think is leaves a bit of a distaste with the fans, and I think it's a bit inconsiderate to the fans as well, and expecting them to have to back a guy that ultimately no one, I mean, at least I haven't seen a statement from the NBA or the Clippers yet. Obviously, it hasn't been confirmed, but I feel like there should be more communication around these kind of signings, because it's not up to the fans to decide whether they want to support or back a move or a decision, and the Clippers really shouldn't be putting the fans in that kind of position to have the decisions, because ultimately there will be a lot of fans out there who start championing this player, and that just, yeah, like you said, leads to fans within the Clippers community, or those who work actually within the Clippers. It causes just discomfort, and I think they definitely owe a statement or explanation, and I'm sure that will come once Lawrence Frank has his presser, either this week or next week, and they announce the signing. Serious questions definitely need to be asked, because I think it's a particularly unacceptable move, considering he has spent, I think, the last few months in Greece, and as the reason that Houston Rockets ultimately split up with him, and yeah, he has had a past of sort of behavior issues. So I think we need to be confident that he is a completely rejuvenated player. But even then, it's still, I think, going to be hard to move past, considering what has happened this off season. So yeah, it's a difficult one, and definitely one that I did not expect at all. And I don't really want to spend too much more time speaking about it. I'll let the Clippers do the explaining on that one.
100%. I completely agree with that, and he's ultimately a player that I'm not going to be in support of as much as I'd like to support anybody who's in the Clippers organization. I wasn't ever a fan of Josh Primo's, or ever lobbying for Josh Primo to get minutes. To be honest, the way I would like to see this saga round off now is by the league stepping in, because if the league truly say that they are repping the WNBA and trying to make more noise about the WNBA, this is a guy who assaulted a player in the WNBA. If you want to boil it down to, even take the domestic violence nature out of it, he's someone who assaulted a fellow professional in Kris Gondrezick, and she's had a tough time in recent times being waived by the Chicago Sky and things like that. So it feels like this could be a scenario where the league steps in, where Adam Silver finally sort of shows some power in a way that he's not really been wont to do in recent years. His comments about Miles Bridges in particular were just bizarre. But this hopefully is a chance where he can step in. He can say to the Clippers that this is not a move that's going to fly, or he can at least give a big suspension to Kevin Porter Jr. to make this no longer worthwhile for the Clippers, because I don't want to see this one ultimately get confirmed or get over the line, or have to feel like in any way I'm conflicted by my support for the Clippers because of this guy's presence on the roster. So as you say, James, we will move on from this one, and obviously solidarity goes to Kershaw Gondrezick, and I hope that she can get back on a WNBA team and back doing what she does best in no time at all as well. But we'll move on to talk about the Russell Westbrook trade talks, but also a couple of the other sort of ongoing trade issues that are going on at the moment with Kris Dunn, and it feels like those two things could be sort of enveloped together, and we'll round off with Mo Bamba off the back of that as well as one of the Clippers' minimum pickups. But the Russell Westbrook trade talks, it said from the moment that the season ended for the Clippers in the playoffs in the first round against the Dallas Mavericks, that I was quite happy for the Clippers to move on from the Russell Westbrook experiment going into next season. Russ is ultimately a guy who I think had been, to all intents and purposes, the heartbeat of the Clippers in recent years, and I didn't see that as necessarily an overwhelmingly positive thing. But there's no disputing that was the case. He was a guy who picked up a Clippers team who the vibes were terrible around 2 seasons ago. Came in, rejuvenated the locker room, had a great series against the Phoenix Suns when the Clippers two stars had gone through injury issues again. But there's so much there's always so much that's positive about the Russell Westbrook experiment and about what he can bring to the Clippers. There's just so much that I think doesn't contribute towards ultimately championship contending basketball. It's the turnovers, it's the erratic nature of again, we talked about freeing up Ivica Zubac before. There was so many times where I just found myself feeling sorry for Ivica Zubac because he would just be stood in the paint and suddenly there's this cannonball coming towards him and the ball's being thrown into him, and Zubac has got to react quickly with his hands and stuff, because Russ is just this guy who plays at 110% all the time. And sometimes the game, particularly when you've got guys like Kawhi Leonard and James Harden who just really play the game at their own pace, sometimes the game just does need to be slowed down and simplified a little. And it's good to have energy guys on your team. And I think the Clippers will still have that going into the season as long as they keep Terrence Mann around. And we mentioned the Derrick Jones Jr. pickup already as well. I'd add Norman Powell into that, as long as again he doesn't get traded away as a guy who can sort of bring that spark off the bench and bring a bit of energy to things. But Russ came with enough issues, and I'm not overly mad about seeing the Clippers looking to move on from him this offseason.
Yeah, no, I'm absolutely in the same position. I thought the backup point guard role was something the Clippers needed to address this offseason. And I think there was an expectation there that Russell Westbrook and the Clippers would part ways. See, he started pretty well, and then, like you said, had that pretty good experience in the Suns series. But I think we have to definitely thank him for making that sacrifice to move back to the bench, because it certainly wasn't working with that Russ and James combination. I think we just saw that the defense wasn't there. Just too many ball handlers, and ultimately he made that sacrifice. And I think there's been reporting since that was a really difficult decision for him to make, but ultimately led to that really that run that the team made in the mid part of the season, where they went on a streak, and he was, I think, brilliant in that role, coming off the bench and providing that energy and that defensive intensity, which I wasn't particularly familiar with Russ, and I think it's easy to see how he can play like that, because he just, as you said, plays 110 miles an hour. He just plays full throttle, whatever position or role he's in. So yeah, I was really impressed with that side of him, but I think ultimately the the lack of shot making has made him sort of unplayable at times, and I think the spacing at the floor at some points with the likes of Zubac on the floor just meant that it was really easy for teams to play against us, easy for us to be guarded. Obviously, that he'd be afforded a lot of space, and I think in some occasions he rightly so would let it fly from 3-point range, but I think too often settled for jump shots, and I think that was part of Clippers' problem over the last few years that we have had Russ on the team. And I think if he focused more on the playmaking side and sort of the defensive side, he could be a great player. I think the Denver Nuggets are particularly interested in him, and I do find that quite interesting to replace Reggie Jackson. But yeah, I think that shot making side just let him down so much. He's just so inefficient shooting the ball. And I think ultimately a trade does make sense. Obviously, he did opt into that contract of $4 million for this season, but the reporting, I think it was Tamara Zayli come out with the news first that the expectation is that he won't be in a Clippers uniform next season, which I think partly there is a disappointment there. Although I'm very happy that we're moving away from him and replacing him in the backup point guard position. I think it was just great to have another Southern California native on that team, and I really did enjoy that dynamic of it. And I think maybe we've all seen the clips of him at the Kendrick Lamar concert a few weeks ago, and he's just a pure vibes player. And I think that's just a part of the team that I'm really going to miss. And he did just bring that enthusiasm and energy every single game. And he obviously had that difficult experience on the Lakers, but I didn't for a second believe that he was a negative part of the locker room. And I think you can see a lot of guys looked up to him within that team, and he did provide that leadership. So that will be lost for sure. But in terms of a fit moving forward, obviously losing Paul George's offensive capability, I think relying on Russell Westbrook as well wouldn't have been the smart decision. I think we need to sort of make improvements on the margins, and that backup point guard position is a place we can do that. And I think we definitely need more shooting efficiency in that role. But we'll definitely miss his intensity and defense. And I wish him best of luck. And I do hope he gets on the Denver Nuggets, because I think that'll be really interesting. I think he spoke about Nikola Jokic when we played the Nuggets earlier in the season, and said they're both sort of maverick style players. And he sort of alluded to, Jokic can do things I can't do, but he could do, I could do things that he can't do, for example. So, yeah, it'll be an interesting link up. It'll be interesting to see where he ends up. I know they're working on a trade, but where we'll see him end up remains to be seen.
Yeah, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there for me in terms of the loss of personality almost, because one of the things that's left me sort of scratching my head the most in recent years is how things went so sour between the Lakers and Russell Westbrook, because Russ is such a good guy. Listen, there's a level of intensity that he brings on the court. I don't know why there's been this thing in recent years of this growing, fans feeling like they can square up to Westbrook and say things to Westbrook and just get away with it. This is ultimately a guy who I think deserves to be loved and supported, because there's so much personality there. There's so much philanthropy there that you've seen, particularly since he's been back in California as well. He's probably been the leader of the Clippers in that sense, in terms of the work he's been doing to positively contribute to his own community. So all of that will be so missed. But the fact that he will eventually, we assume, be landing on a championship team is a huge plus, and I'm pleased to see that. To be honest, I'm pleased that he may well get the chance to win a ring next season, because I think Russ is a guy who ultimately deserves that. I'd love to see that for his own legacy, as long as it's not at the expense of the Clippers, if the Clippers are going to be in contention next season. But it'll be easy to see how things sort of shake out over the next few weeks, James, or the next few days, but potentially, because it seems like Russ is going to end up in Denver one way or another. It feels like at the moment the most likely route is probably via a buyout. And maybe it's going to be Utah who are going to be crucially involved in that as well, because obviously the news is broke in the last sort of 24 hours. It would have come through UK time for us in the morning, so I'm not so sure on the exact time it would have come through last night, but I certainly woke up to the news that Kris Dunn had basically agreed these terms to become a Clippers player. I like the Kris Dunn fit. There's some levels of concerns that I have in terms of I wouldn't have minded going into this season being able to see Bones get more sort of backup point guard minutes, and whether Bones is now used as sort of make weight in a trade, because he's one of the younger Clippers guys that has some upside. It remains to be seen, but the one thing I probably can, really get behind is Kris Dunn's, level of defense that he's going to bring off the bench as the Clippers backup point guard. There's almost maybe an argument you could make that you can go, a little bit horses for courses and blend the skill sets of a guy like Bones, who doesn't bring as much defensive intensity, although I'd argue he's an underrated defender, really, and a guy like Kris Dunn, who probably doesn't bring as much of that sort of, spark in a scoring sense off the bench as a guy like Bones does. And maybe that's the way forward for the Clippers, and probably most crucially for me, the way to keep KPJ out of the rotation as well.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited about this one. I think just from the defensive standpoint, and we've alluded to it earlier, obviously losing Paul George. I think the Clippers are going all in on just being a more defensive team next season. And I've seen all sorts of metrics to suggest Kris Dunn is one of the best point of attack defenders in the whole of the NBA. It'll be interested on that contract side, because I think on the sign and trade deal it has to be like three years or something. So obviously believe he can provide that level of output over a number of seasons. But I think he slots nicely into that role to replace Russell Westbrook, because they'll with Bones, and I can get the argument for Bones, and I was a massive fan of him and was really excited when he came to the Clippers. But just watching him run the team on a few occasions, I think maybe his position is maybe more off ball, and I think as a defender he can be sort of picked apart, particularly in the playoff games. You can see Ty Lue just isn't going to call his number very often, and ultimately if that's the case, then maybe you want more of a defensive expert in that position. And I think he's definitely got talent on the offensive side as well. He's a pretty efficient scorer, particularly attacking the rim, and he's got a pretty deep floater bag as well. So it'd be really interesting to see Kris. Obviously, I think this is his first time on the Clippers, but technically he played for the Agua Caliente Clippers a few seasons back. So I think he's one that Clipper fans and reporters and content creators in the space have looked for and have been pretty excited about this move. So I'm really excited to see him. And again, I think it just builds out that defensive stability that we'll have next season in Intuit Dome. We can really make it a fortress. And I think with the additions of Kris Dunn, Nicolas Batum, and Derrick Jones Jr., you've really got a solid foundation for a great defensive team there. And obviously I've mentioned Jeff Van Gundy as assistant. I don't know how much of a role he's played in this, but it was clear the Clippers needed to improve that defensive angle. And if you lose a player like Paul George, who has his level of ability, you can at least make a really strong team that can contend with all different teams. And all I think about is sort of Anthony Edwards' comments about Kevin Durant and having Jalen McDaniels. And I think we've got sort of 3 or 4 of those guys now who can say maybe don't have like the offensive efficiency, but you can really see those players make a difference when it comes to the big moments in the big games. And as long as they're fairly competent shooters, which I think Kris Dunn, Derrick Jones Jr. and Nicolas Batum all are, Terrence Mann included, who's obviously a great spot-up shooter. You've got a really great defensive base there. And I think it's going to be really exciting in the Intuit Dome last season. I think the crowd can really play into the defensive intensity that Ty Lue and Jeff Van Gundy are going to play with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll round off with the final acquisition then, and the one that's been confirmed again in the last 24 hours is the pickup of Mo Bamba. And you mentioned about the Clippers, leaning into that more defensive side of the game. Mo Bamba for me, particularly in the sort of early days of his career, one of the reputations that he came into the league with in particular was, being an elite level rim protector. He's a guy who can score from 3 as well. He's definitely a stretch 5 in that sense. I'm really sort of this the one I'm the most intrigued by in the sense of, I think this one will be the one where the proof is the most in the pudding. Like, I think I can 100% make the case for a guy like Derrick Jones Jr. I can definitely make the case for a guy like Nicolas Batum being on the team. I can make the case for a guy like Kris Dunn being on the team. The Mo Bamba one is probably the one that surprises me most in terms of guys that I do think will be able to contribute this season, or guys that I'm hoping will be able to contribute this season. But there's still, the reason I think Mo Bamba has not been able to land himself with a proper home in the NBA yet is just not been able to find that consistency. But I've written about this in recent years when covering the Clippers, that ultimately the Clippers under Tyler, if nothing else, have been a place where we're seeing guys, Nicolas Batum being one of the key ones, be able to rehabilitate their careers. And I don't think for Mo Bamba it'd even be a case of him having to necessarily rehabilitate. It's just tapping into that level of potential that I think he has. And the Clippers being a more defensive outfit and him being the rim protector that sort of anchors that defense off the bench, and then being able to go up the other end and stretch the floor and have, him and Nico and people on the perimeter being able to knock down shots. And as you say, there's guys in there who can be, elite rim runners. Terrence being one of them, Kris Dunn being one of them too. It feels like the Clippers have given themselves a really good spread of skill sets by picking up Mo Bamba for that bench role there.
Yeah, I think we've been desperate for a backup big like Mo Bamba in a few years, and again the proof's in the pudding with whether he can deliver and ultimately have that consistency, which I think sets you up for those sort of guaranteed big contracts that he's obviously looking for. I don't think we've had a player like him since Serge Ibaka. Maybe Isaiah Hartenstein, slightly different players, but in terms of that rim protection that Zoo provides, and it feels like he's the only big that's been providing that for the last few years. I think he's an excellent addition. And take some of that load off Zoo. And I think you saw in a number of games over the last few seasons where we've had Daniel Tice or Mason Plumlee that they haven't been quite at that level of defensive rim protection. So yeah, he's definitely going to bring that with him in terms of his shot blocking, his rebounding, but he can also make he can make 3-pointers at a decent rate as well, so he can stretch the floor. So it'll be really interesting to see how he develops, and with some of the development coaches that are there, I'm sure they can continue to work with him because he is still really quite, he's young. He's a young guy. He bounces around a few different teams, and I hope that this is where he lands and takes off really. And something that I learned just before this, what I thought was really interesting. He has a really close relationship with Kawhi, and I had no idea until I looked it up. And apparently, Kawhi was a mentor for Mo when his brother went to prison or something. So again, I need to dig into that a bit more, but I found it just before we went live, and I thought it was really interesting. So he already have that connection with Kawhi, and I think he's been a mentor for him throughout his life. So hopefully this could be the place where he really kicks on, and he's already got that sort of locker room connection with our number one players. So really interesting, and I hope that this locker room builds out into something we've seen in years past, where Clippers have had really good success when we've had a good locker room culture and sort of fans have bought into that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm excited to see Mo Bamba in this season for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's a dead interesting story. I'd not heard anything to that effect. So yeah, I'd be interested to see how much unity there'll be in the Clippers locker room. There's going to be a lot of unity, we hope, for Clippers fans heading into a Dome this season. A lot for the Clippers to be excited about. We've run through all the moves there. DJ Dents is going to be moving to get Sheck Wes on his playlist for Intuit Dome now as well. There is loads to be excited about for the Clippers heading into the new arena. Listen, this is the first view from the Clipper. You have to let me and James know on our socials what we think. I'm Sexton24 on Twitter. You can get James at ClippersUK on Twitter and his personal. If you want to get onto James and see find out a little bit more about the guy. His personal is in the bio of the Clippers UK one there as well. But yeah, very exciting times as we say for the Clippers. James, anything else to add to round off there?
No, yeah, just really excited to kick this off, and obviously it's been a interesting week Clippers news, so I'm glad we could jump on, kick this off, and definitely look forward to more in the future. And yeah, excited for next season now that obviously all this news has come out, and yeah, stay tuned because there's going to be a lot more, and I'm hoping to bring more content to Clippers UK and to the community that we've created over there. So yeah, cheers, Josh, for jumping on this with me, and obviously we'll look forward to the next one.
Of course, man. Yeah, thank you very much for allowing me to host and drive the train of this first one as well. And hopefully the Clippers will be driving the train into Intuit Dome next season. All the screens, all the toilets, everything that comes with Intuit Dome. Hopefully we've got some banners we can be hanging up there sometime soon as well. Hopefully we want to see more exciting basketball, more unity, as we mentioned, in the locker room there. And much more just good vibes going into next season, because as Clippers fans, we had enough bad vibes, enough bad luck and bad luck charms and things and injuries down the years. I would give up vital organs for an injury-free season next season. So we'll be hoping for loads more of that. We'll be back. I imagine me and James in the next couple of weeks covering the last sort of moves that shake out across the Clippers roster, some of the ones that we've highlighted there, and potentially heading into Summer League and have a bit of a look at the Clippers Summer League roster, and maybe that'll be the next thing we cover on here. But as I say, let us know what you thought of the pilot episode overview from the Clipper, and go Clips go.